I'd like to thank Stefan for inviting me, and Kimberly, his assistant, for arranging my visit. And I have to start with an apology because I have to fly out of here at 1 o'clock today to go to Maine. My son has his first parents' weekend at Bowdoin College, and I managed to find a JetBlue flight that will take me out of here and not a red eye. So I'm very sorry to miss the rest of the conference. When you reach your 60s, I think unexpected things happen. It hadn't occurred to me that several of my close friends would die within a couple of years of each other. I wasn't shocked because, like Masao, they had lived full lives. But I certainly wasn't prepared either. I just hadn't really thought about the prospect, which I realize sounds odd in retrospect. For some reason that perhaps Freud could explain, most of my close friends are older than I am, from a couple of years to as many as 15. Masao was a good friend, and the characteristic that Masao and I shared, we didn't share a lot of other interests, particularly not literary ones. You never needed to start at point zero when I would see him again with a conversation. You just picked up the conversation wherever you left it and kept it going for as long as you wanted, lubricated, of course, with good food and drink. I had the same relationship with Bill Sibley, a longtime scholar of Japanese literature at Chicago. He called one cold winter day, I think it was February, and said he had lung cancer. And then he said, "Surprise, surprise," he remarked, which is so typical of him. He was a chain smoker. 14 months later, he was gone after chemotherapy and radiation and all of that. Then, rather quickly after that, Friedrich Katz, a very close friend of mine and my wife's, a great scholar of Mexico, and especially Pancho Villa and the Mexican Revolution, told me he had bladder cancer, and he was gone in a few months. Jim Pellet, a friend for 40 years, and I think by a long shot the best American historian of pre-20th century Korea, got sick with leukemia and lingered on and eventually passed away. He was only 73. Chalmers Johnson, whose voice I think all of us miss so much, also is another one of my friends, somewhat older, who passed. I'm very happy to see Sheila Johnson here today. Franz Schermann was not a close friend of mine, but someone I admired and looked up to for decades. Occasionally we would meet, and his conversation was simply enthralling. He died in 2010. Now, if you just look at that list of Masao and Chalmers Johnson and Franz Schermann and Friedrich Katz and the others, it's just an enormous loss to our intellectual and political life. Now, as I understand it, unlike Bill Sibley, Masao decided to let his lung cancer run its course quickly without the tripartite regimen of surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. The Harvard biologist Richard Levinson once wrote in the New York Review, "Decades of cancer research and billions of dollars later, we still cut it out, burn it out, or radiate it." This was typical of Masao, I think, this decision. He was a person of realism and a rare courage. His courage was just automatic. I mean, someone earlier used the term fearless. I remember just a very modest example of it, but one that I probably wouldn't have done myself. We're sitting at a conference at Duke, and some white American international studies blowhard was going on about how Oda Makoto was such a dangerous person, anti-American, and probably a racist to boot. Masao politely waited until he finished and then looked him in the eye and said, "His wife is Korean." And the blowhard didn't even get Masao's point. It's a minor example of a major quality that led Masao to a number of political positions that were early, prescient, and determined, like his support for the Palestinians right after the Six-Day War in 1967, which of course earned him tons of opprobrium and the reputation dangerous person. As I said earlier, I'm not of the humanities. I'm not a literary type. At Chicago, history is actually part of the social sciences division. And if you look back 100 years, it was considered the first social science. I arrived at Chicago in 1987, interested in politics, war, political economy, things like that. And Harry Haratunian and I became instant friends. That's how I met Masao, was through Harry. But to keep up with these people, I had to read 50 or 60 books. At that time, the University of Chicago was essentially divided between rational choice theory, which was in most of the social sciences, and especially, of course, economics, and French theory of various kinds, post-structural theory, postmodern, and the like. And my towering ignorance of these fields that Masao and Harry knew so well didn't bother them. They would ask me, they would mention some name. By the way, they were never people who said, "Have you read so-and-so's book?" I always hate that. I never say that to somebody. I try never to say it because there's a kind of one-upsmanship implied in the question. But anyway, I did read a great deal, and finally, of course, I read in 1991 Masao's book, Off Center, which is, of course, the title of my presentation today. And what he wrote about, of course, was a sense of radical displacement that had been more or less with me since I was a little kid. And some unfortunate family circumstances knocked me, or you might say drop-kicked me, onto the periphery of my extended family of white Anglo-Saxon Episcopalians in Ohio. An octopus with 12 arms descending from my great-grandfather. Anyway, they began to look at me with different eyes, and I saw them with different eyes. But it had never occurred to me to adopt this personal sense of displacement as a method, as a new way of seeing our discipline and the study of East Asia. Maybe I had been doing it before without thinking, but throughout the 1990s, my work in one way or another grew out of reading Off Center. This book exhibits Masao's casual courage and insouciance. It's hugely funny. I mean, Masao had a great sense of humor. He was remarkably smart, but also remarkably funny. Take as an example in Off Center, one of the people that the New York Review of Books has anointed as a house expert on East Asia, Ian Buruma. I'm quoting Masao. "Buruma likes inanities, but why doesn't he discuss real minds? Instead, he's maddeningly addicted to easy reads." And then Masao goes on, "He doesn't think deeply about history, nor does he try to understand the past." And what he's talking about is a kind of highbrow, insular Orientalism at the New York Review, where the editors turn time and time again to people unlikely to upset anyone in their circles, who aren't really interested in East Asia in the first place, or somebody who might, nor would it be somebody who would upset another person at a Japan Society cocktail party. I always thought about Buruma, Jonathan Spence, and Jonathan Mirsky, to name two others in that stable. I mean, I had always thought this, but I hadn't seen anybody write it. And if I hadn't liked Masao already, I liked him after that. He then proceeded in the same passage to demolish Carl von Wolfram's Enigma of Japanese Power, a book the New York Times editors loved and cited several times in their left side of the page editorials. Von Wolfram's book is the only one I know that was well reviewed in the National Interest, Foreign Affairs, and the New Left Review, covering the limited American spectrum. Yet to open just the first few pages of this book is to sniff an interwar Orientalism Japan embodies an opaque system that goes around doing things like beating the pants off of us in economic competition. That was in the